What's up? Welcome back. I think we had like a little Wi-Fi disconnect on my side. We're about to re-add Wesley. Like I told y'all, it's bananas. We about to go down the mother train. Let's get Wesley back. He's about to join us in a few seconds. Let's get him. If you guys are enjoying, give us some shouts out in the comments. Say what's up to us. Happy New Year, everyone. And let's get them going. Let's see. Are we getting them? Yeah, I think that was my Wi-Fi. That's the reason. Because I was having like an issue. Oh, my teeth look really good on here. Let's see, Wesley, are you getting it? Are you getting the invite? Oh, it says unable to join. Let's see. Might have to redo this one over to, let's see if we can get it. Oh, okay. Can you hear me nice and clear? Okay, yeah. I think it was my thing. My cat plays in the closet with the Wi-Fi thing, and sometimes it wiggles around. Yeah, it's real. Carbon's a nightmare. It's really bad. But like I'm jumping right back to what you just said. You said that you said in most aspects two things can be true, and it's interesting that you said it because like years ago I lost my mom, and it was a really tough time for me that I put away somewhere else in order to just keep going. You know, I also wasn't disappointed with the lack of time that I invested in getting to know. But as I've gotten older, I try to dig up that stuff like that teenage years and things of that nature. And I've sat with a lot of things that really hit me like, oh my gosh, like I remember that. I remember her doing that. I remember her doing this. I remember a lot of things that I did, but also, like you just said, struggling with that difficulty of two things being right at the same time and like coexisting. And that was like really a thing. It's really been a thing that I haven't been able to regurgitate, but like, I think in my Virgo space and mindset, and I'm not don't get me wrong, I saw you laugh. I'm not a person that hides behind like, child, I'm just a Virgo, that's what we do. Like, I'm not that girl. I am not that girl. I'm a very own my stuff, accountability, but in the Virgo essence of things, I feel like we're people that take stuff, let it blow up inside of us and just keep moving, but it impacts us eventually, it definitely does. Do therapists?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. I mean, I have my own therapist. So
Yeah, I remember. And like your therapist has like a completely different like social dynamic than you.
Cisgender, straight, heterosexual identified man. Yeah. Jewish.
And you guys are like you said, it's been years. Like, yeah. What is that space like? How did you guys build that
I
trust?
think for me, really, it was just I own it. Like I come into my therapy space owning it. If he doesn't get it, he say, Wesley, I don't understand when you talk about being, the reality of being a butch queen. Like can you and I'd be like, oh child, remember, and so I think I think just really coming into the space, owning the space, being really honestly self-reflective and him just now being comfortable and just straight up and be like, yeah, I don't know what that feels like. And me knowing that I don't have to know what that feels like, but it is important for me sometimes to just throw some shit out and see if it sticks. If I don't like it next week, I'll come back. You know what, dog? I thought a couple about what I told you about, then I don't think it's really true,
Yeah. Like more of it's like just an ongoing kind of conversation. I think to that point, the reason why I have not had therapy in a while is I used to go to this spot in Harlem and met this young lady, like around the time when I was like trying to dive into it. It was my mom passing, I had a health scare, all kinds of stuff that just happened to me that you just never think is gonna happen. You know, like it's just like I'm living this life, I'm happy,
Okay, exactly.
popular, I'm in New York City, we're tearing it. And then you're like, oh my God, this is like life, you know? One of the things that really deterred me was the movement around my main girl relocating to the West Coast. And this is before, like, you know, there was a lot of like social engagement, things that nature. You just really were given to someone else in a way that you kind of were starting over. And I had to do that 3 times. And after the 3rd time, I remember one time I was talking to one of the ladies that they had assigned me to, and I was telling her about the one time that I had like just gotten into a really, really, really dark depression and didn't hurt myself, but felt in the idea of not being here, suicidal. How would it happen? How would it go? And as I was explaining this to her, she told me, well, it's a good thing you were not strong enough to do it. And it was like, it was the worst thing that I could have ever heard, because it's like, the way that I heard that was like,
exactly.
You know what I mean? It's just like, bitch, you're telling me I'm still here because I'm pussy.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm just like, that is not the thing. And it was so weird, kind of trying to keep connecting to someone in order to get that vulnerability. Because like, how vulnerable are people when they start therapy? Like, do some people just come in with it on a platter? Some people you gotta chisel away at. It's like, of course it varies, but is there a way that makes that a little bit easier?
I mean,
for
they
people?
say in our work that they say
So they
you don't actually know the patient that you're seeing for 3 to 6 months. So that person comes in quite guarded, heavily guarded, fearful, you know, again, sometimes having seen other
disbelief.
Right, exactly.
Disbelief.
Shock. They don't even, sometimes patients come in, they don't even know how they feel right now. They, you know, I just lost somebody, or I just got this. I'm numb, like I'm literally numb. And so you as a therapist, well, tell me, like, you know, what brought you here? And they're like, you know what, this happened. They can tell you about it from a factual, but then you're like, I need you to dig inside. Like, what is that? You know, what are those feelings? What is that emotions? What is that belief system? Where did that come from? And, you know, they're like, I'm so numb, I don't know. You know, I could just come and do this 45 minutes right now, you know, as I walk into, and hopefully you can hold my hand through this. And I think that, you know, what can make it easier is is the therapist being like transparent, really saying, you know, I really want to be here with you right now, and saying, but it's really hard, you know, and I don't mind saying to my patients, you know, especially in the beginning, it's really hard to try to get things from you. You know, I know you came because you wanted to be here, but what else is going on that drives you to be here? Even if it's superficial, you know, it could be superficial, but just give me something.
Yeah. Give me something that I can even just like piggyback on. Are from your opinion, are men more?
See, I'm biased. I struggle.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, be biased.
Right.
Be biased.
I'm biased. You know, I struggle. I really am challenged by like women. You know, because I see our sisters really working really hard to be a lot of things. And, you know, the idea of, you know, sometimes the idea of saying, you know, sweetie, I think you're doing a lot, you know, and that coming from a man, you know, can just kind of come, especially received wrong. Oh, that's because you think women are weak. Look, you know, look, girl. I'm not here for this.
The other thing, that
Exactly.
was that conversation that we were having on that cruise. Like, I find myself, I don't have a lot of cis
Mhm.
female friends. Like a lot, my community was built around likeness, and most of my friends
Mhm.
are gay Black men. However, in that conversation, I have built more community with, and like I don't even use
Mhm.
the term cis.
Right.
Like I just say straight in the idea, but I mean I know what it means when I need to use it. But in the idea, I've always felt that our social gap with heterosexual and homosexual really
Mhm.
falls on women. That's just an opinion of mine. In the idea that I'm speaking of a Black man attracted to Black men and also existing with straight Black women. Because it's like
Mhm.
outside of the therapy and all of that, the way that we exist, like you said, you have a bias in that way that women have a tendency, from my opinion, to always see men. You know how like when girls say like,
Right.
you cute
Exactly.
again, as if because you're not
Right.
attracted to them,
Right.
you're wasteful. And it's like it's demeaning. It's like this demeaning idea of like masculinity that I think also straight men use in a way of looking at another man in a smell of femininity, dismissing him, but it's also just for the
Mhm.
female gaze. You know, like it's for their eye that we go to. Do you think that that is predominantly racial, or is it just
I think it's
like a
true. I think it's
social
social.
thing?
I think the as you kind of like move up the kind of like individuals who have like accomplished more and who have attained more than it quite changes. Like their perception and like what triggers them does kind of change. I think is race, yes, a part of it. Again, I mean, if you're talking with a Black woman who had the unfortunate experience of being abandoned by her father, of course, even if she's the most accomplished CEO, she still has that kind of like stuff that's going on that's again going to play out in therapy with a Black man like me.
Right. And it's almost as if you're kind of telling, like the patient might feel like they're literally
Hmm.
telling their issues
Exactly.
to the villain.
Exactly.
You know, it's kind of
Hmm.
hard to look past you
Hmm.
as a person of
And
trust.
sometimes it takes
Yeah,
calling
yeah,
it out
yeah.
in therapy. It's like
What,
sometimes it takes in, I've noticed in like several sessions that, you seem quite guarded when we talk about a certain thing, or I sense in you like this sense of uncomfortableness. I don't mind owning and them saying, you know what, you're wrong. And I could be wrong. I don't mind being wrong. My ego is not that fragile that I don't mind being wrong.
is it a dangerous place as it like in that
Mm,
to be
I think when I
wrong?
was a young therapist, definitely it was a dangerous place for me to be because I would feel, all kinds of offended or like even get defensive my own self. So one of the most I feel like significant parts about being a therapist is recognizing that not only is there transference, which is what the patient transfers onto you, but the feelings and emotions you transfer on the patient that they bring up in you. Which is why I think every therapist needs a therapist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you're literally walking
Hmm.
around with everybody's bags. That's it. What is something like I love asking all these questions. I just think of something. What's like what's the hardest part going
Hmm.
back to the doing the work? What's the hardest part that people need to acknowledge when going into that space?
Ooh, that's a good question. So the hardest part that people need to acknowledge before or during or while in that space, uh, I think
Give me
before
all three.
is recognizing sometimes like, I think, we live in New York City. I don't live in physically in New York City, but most of my practices in New York City, right?
But you're a New
Or
Yorker,
people
right?
who like, oh, I've heard about therapy. I tell all my girlfriends they should go to therapy, yada yada yada. So therapy is like a buzzword nowadays. I've had Right. I've
like
had
trendy
straight guys say, Doc,
almost.
do you know how much sex I get when I tell a woman that, I'm in therapy?
How much pussy they throw because
Exactly.
they think this nigga's doing the work.
Exactly. You know,
He's sitting there like a brick wall.
so I think that one of the important things is to acknowledge before you, like, is there something that's like a non-negotiable? Like, what do I not want to talk about? Like, what's off limits? Because I will say, like, I really am like all about kind of like, hey, you know what? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. So say, hey, doc, I only want to go but this far. I don't want you to take me, all the way there and have me crying in therapy and so forth and so on, so that we can know that from the very beginning. Like these are the goals that I want to accomplish. I don't want to uncover, what that was like to be, sexually molested and so forth and so on and blah, 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 blah. I don't want to relive that trauma. Okay, good. You know what? You thought that through, so acknowledging how far you're willing to go. I think the other part in therapy, being in therapy, one of the important things to acknowledge is when your therapist is not saying, I feel like I need my patients to train me. Say, hey, doc, you know what? You said last week that, this, it made me, it kind of triggered me. I didn't really realize it, yada, yada, yada. Or even just saying, you know what, doc, sometimes you talk too much. I'm okay with that. So I think that those are some important things, is acknowledging that nobody's perfect. Not even your therapist is going to walk in the room and automatically know what you need, who you are, and what's going on in your life. It's going to take a lot of work from you internally to kind of like really like tell that person, like, this is how I'm showing up. Right.
Teach them like how to
Right.
treat you and like how to handle you. No, I mean, but is that how far do you allow that person to do it before it's now like getting in the way of the work that you want to do?
I don't think there's any way. I mean, because I've shown up with who I've had patients show up and they're like, I want you to do, I look, not in literally saying, I want you to do the work for me, but oftentimes asking me, doc, what do you think? Doc, what do you think? Doc, what do you think? That means they don't want to do the work. And I flip it back. I'm like, wow, what I think is really important to you. And I'm nobody, So I wonder how many other people you care about what they think you should be doing. Mm-hmm.
What they think, and like that,
Mm-hmm.
like that prison in your mind of like doing it. Wow.
The girl is like, oh my God, this is such a deep session. I didn't come ready for this today.
Right. And you just sit there like, oh wow, that's deep. Do in your practice, do you have to look at words like narcissism and all of those kind of things unbiasedly? Do they have a positive or negative?
Well, I mean, so sometimes people say you can't be a therapist and not have a bit of narcissism, right? The idea that you can help somebody and heal somebody, you have to.
Right. Or just walk in knowing that you can do it. Like, I wonder about that. I've been called a narcissist before by someone. I didn't respect the range of vocabulary this person had, so I kind of thought it was a little gaslight. I kind of thought it was a little gaslighty, but I did receive that moment. That's why I asked that.
Yeah, I mean, again, all types of individuals come in with narcissistic fathers who didn't have the ability to be empathetic, narcissistic mothers who didn't have the ability to put their child's needs and emotions first, all types of narcissism. I mean, individuals, again, egos sometimes get bruised. So the narcissistic ego was bruised because, you know what, she's never had like a man tell her, no, I don't want what you got. And you know what, like now her core is shook because every man she's tried to give it to is like, head over heels for it. And that's a bit of narcissistic personality. Like, again, this idea that, you're greater than life, you're bigger than life, and that everybody, every man wants to be with you.
Do you think that it's not so much narcissism, but more so rooted in something else that could be dug up? Or is
case by case? I mean, sometimes it's rooted in insecurity, really deep, buried insecurity that has just over time, become such a they've developed so many guards against the idea, you know, of that. What does it mean to be deeper, to have something, you know, to not be able to offer something else other than that, you know? So yeah, it's definitely a lot more roots. I mean, I think the personality disorder aspect of it just falls on the part of what we call the spectrum, where that person can't even acknowledge it. Like they aren't even willing to kind of consider it as a possibility. So it becomes a personality disorder versus narcissistic traits. You know, so that's the kind of like thing. Sometimes these things, when the person gets shaken to their core, sometimes by rejection, sometimes by failure, you know, where they have no choice but to turn the mirror on themselves, because they've been like, oh, you know, the world is set up against me, and this is why I failed, because everybody was set up against me, without turning the mirror on themselves and like doing a really good self-inventory. So they may have like one of those breaks where they're like, oh shit, like it's me, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
Like you become the problem, or maybe not seeing the problem. Is there like a word or term that you just feel like it's just oversaturated when it comes to like therapy?
I mean, I think it used to be that word woke. I think that word woke used to be like, so look, you know.
Woke wears me out. Like most of the time, the people that are always somewhere talking about being woke,
Right. Exactly.
and, oh, world, it's like, baby girl, get some rest, get some shut eye, get something, because you are just a little bit too. This I can imagine like politics, like all boiling down. Like there's so many layers to the onion that it's I don't know. Like I'm sitting here even thinking about like a few things that you said like prior to, with the mom situation and the go back and forth. What are alternatives for people that just can't adapt to therapy?
So they can't adapt to therapy because
it's just something about it that just does not connect, because there's people out there that there's just no getting through to that another person can help.
I think is, again, so we oftentimes see, especially I feel like with individuals who like have substance use disorders, who are like, yeah, girl, I don't want to give it up. I don't want to give it up. I recognize that it's like, you know, changing my life is not giving me the type of life that I want, but I'm also not at that point where I want to change my behavior or change that about myself, you know? So I think that when those individuals, you know, seek out therapy, it's like, how can you like help me like figure that out? It's like, you know what, you may want to have, I mean, I don't know that you want to pay $150 a session, you know, to not do the work, you know, to not really like dig in, you know.
Yeah. It's just like,
now don't get me wrong, I've had it. You know, I've definitely had those individuals in my work, and you know, we do what they're willing to do, is allow it to be as superficial as they need it to be. But I think that, you know, again, it's just, I mean, there's things like workbooks, there's self-help stuff that's out there if the person isn't ready to do therapy.
What do you do for you to disconnect from the load of things that you take in from people? What do you do for you?
So I journal. I definitely still journal, because again, if I don't like sit and try to keep it in my head and tell myself, oh yeah, it's part of my job, it's part of my work, you know. No, if a patient triggers me, like I've had an individual tell me, oh, you're smart for a Black therapist. And I was like, really? Like, girl, really? Like,
For a Black therapist.
Yeah. The person was
the
white.
person
well, the
white
person was
or another race?
You know, they didn't identify as Black or a minority, you know. So I had to write down what that felt like, how that triggering that was, you know, to kind of like be told like, wow, like, you know, literally, like, yeah, I expected you, in some ways, it was like, I expected you not to be,
I
Right.
expect you
Right.
to be bad.
Exactly.
Yeah. How did you
In
respond to
that
that?
moment, I was very kind of like, I think I was shocked. I was like, well, I don't really understand what you mean.
Yeah. Even though you're like inside, like, man, who the fuck me? But like you just sat and processed it. And how did they respond after you said that?
I
How
don't
did they
even know that they realized it. That how offensive how offensive that came out, you know, and then, you know, again, to look at what was the intent. So again, sometimes you have to look at, well, what was the person's intent? Was that her intent to offend me? Or is that her intent? Or is this quite normally how she normally talks at home, you know?
Yeah.
Right,
It's just
exactly.
normal.
This is what she thinks
Like for them.
about other
Yeah,
people
yeah.
of color, and then we got an opportunity to dig into all that stuff and, you know, and work through that actually. But sometimes it does damage you. Mhm.
Uh, what was the outcome? Did you find it to be something that this person didn't realize that they were saying, or did you realize that it was like
It was internalized
internalized like
racism
racism?
and perception. Hmm.
Wow,
And yet she chose me.
that's
She picked up the
deep.
phone and
Which
called me. You know.
right? Did what? Well, not that journey specifically. In all of those, which ones are the longest in the idea of getting to the root, whether it be like sexual issues, racial issues, personal issues? Is there one in your practice that when
Mhm.
you in the first couple sessions, when the person reveals maybe what XYZ might be, that you kind of
Mhm.
see or prepare yourself for that journey?
I
Is there one in specific?
honestly think addiction, and that is a range of addictions. Let's be honest. So when that,
You literally, not to cut you off, when we were on a cruise, you're the first person I ever
Mhm.
heard mention something about sex addiction.
Really,
Never heard that before.
wow, yeah.
Because
Hmm.
in my mind, it's a thing of pleasure. However, I didn't realize it could be a thing of like
Hmm.
need in the way that I associate addiction and not being able to. But keep going. You said
Addiction
like
is the one,
addiction is
again,
the
because
one.
it's filled with so many layers. One, the idea that I want to change. What is that guided by? Is that because, well, society says that I shouldn't be watching porn 3 times a day. Well, but is that what you want to do? Or are you like letting society say this is an addiction for you? So again, they're wavering on these sides of kind of like, what's my motivation behind it? And sometimes there are moments where people like have this kind of like what we call like they contemplated, they were in action, and then they fall back. And oftentimes I find with addiction, like when people like, okay, I contemplated, I went into the action phase, and then they fall back into that contemplation phase. Well, is it really like, is it really harming me? You know, I sometimes.
Is it really that
Right,
bad? Am I
exactly,
that far
exactly. So
gone?
I find
Yeah.
that when a person comes in with and they identify it as an addiction, not I identify it as an addiction, then that oftentimes is going to be a pretty long road. Because again, especially into that where they can get to where they maintain this new sense of sobriety. I mean, the thing we have like out here right now, we have like SLAW, which is Sex Love Addicts Anonymous. We have like, you know, Porn Addicts Anonymous. We have so many different anonymouses, again, based on what people say, well, you know, somebody told me that this is a problem. Well, what do you feel like is, well, I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, that's my thing. That's what I'm wondering. Like where that's why when you said sex addict, I was just like I didn't see me just
Mhm.
personally, I didn't see where that could fall into a problem. Like where would watching porn 3 times a
Mhm.
day be a problem?
How,
And like
why, like,
how
again, they
though?
feel like, hey, it takes away from my time with my wife. You know, I'm not able to be intimate with my wife because I'm trying to play out this
Ah,
fantasy that I constantly see, you know, and or I'm hiding it, and you know, I have this shame from it. So, you know, but I can't stop myself from doing it.
the that makes
Hmm.
so much sense. Makes so much sense. The idea that you were supposed to get maybe XYZ done today, and didn't get it done, you'll go into a self-loathing kind of space because you spent that time wanting to do that. Is there a gauge?
Is there a gauge when I feel, for me, when it impairs your functioning, when you can't live, work, and play, again, if it's distracting, causing you to have hypoactive sex drive. So if you're in a relationship where you want to have sex, or your partner wants to have sex, but you are doing, you're so engaged with the addiction that you can't show up, in a sexual way to please their needs, then that's interfering with your relationship. If it's also interfering with your work, like again, there are individuals who need to watch it that they can't even, it's before they can't even go to work or operate at work, without it. So, again, so I feel like for me, the gauge is how does it affect how you work? How does it affect how you live? And how does it affect how you play? If you're isolating yourself away from friends and you feel lonely, blah, 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 but you have to do this, then this impacts you socially, So that's my gauge, that's my barometer. But if a person comes to me and say, oh, I have an addiction, but it doesn't impact any of those areas, I'm like, you don't have an addiction. You have something that you dislike. You have something that you feel like isn't serving you, but it's not an addiction.
Wow, that's deep. Because now it makes me look at things. I think I drink too much. However, if I know I have to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning for a call time, I also know better than to drink past, 10 p.m. So it's just like in my mind, I'll think that I have this addiction to alcohol or, such because of past family members, XYZ. But it's not an addiction. It's just, like you said, something that I do that I probably don't like. Or just excessive of
what society tells you is excessive. What society tells you is excessive.
Yeah. With in your field of work, do you guys ever hit that kind of crossword between science and faith?
That's a hard one, because I'm a person of color, so I mean, faith is always
I ask good questions. I just want to know.
So from my experience and from just kind of like being a person of color and a Black therapist, is you have to implement faith as a part of like your work. One of the things that we learn in our training is that, the idea that we quite often pathologize faith and religion. But I think that if you work with people of color, whether they be Black, Latinx, whatever, like you better acknowledge like who they are and where they are spiritually, or else you are quite possibly missing half of who that person is. Whether that be just as simple as something that's church hurt, something as simple as, my grandma who was a Bible beating, pastor in Brooklyn, who didn't love me, yada, 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 and told me that I was a sin and whatever. We better acknowledge how faith and how religion has played out in your life and how it may even still do, avoidance, again, all of those different things. I think as a person of color, yes, you have to, as a therapist of color, you have to acknowledge like faith, religion, and how it has served and not served. And also at the same time, acknowledge your own, because a lot of times I will probably rarely have a white patient or a client who will ask me what my religion is, but I can tell you, if 75% of the time, if it's somebody who asks me my religion, or my faith, I already know it's a Black person.
Did that become a difficult
for me, no, not at this point. Maybe when I was a younger therapist, recognizing that I still was doing my own work, the idea that I have to please people, that I have to please my patients. So not wanting to, because you can easily skate around that. And as a therapist to say, that's really interesting that you're interested about me. Can I understand like why that's important information? you know, versus like now it's very much kind of like, hey, this is who I am. These are these are the intersections that I'm a part of, that identify as Black, gay, Christian, you know, Baptist, blah 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 blah. And these are how all my interests enter with me, you know. And then recognizing that before it was like, okay, well, I was, like I said, trying to please my patients, and I was doing exactly the same thing that I was telling them that's problematic for them, trying to please everybody and trying to make everybody happy.
Yeah. I know, like, you know, I think faith is definitely something that is embedded in us as African Americans. I think the older we get, it just becomes even more difficult to try to find sometimes that peace in, like, you know, what my question was, like the science, the faith. With the continual work, is there ever a point where you feel like it's never gonna end?
Like with patients or
In a way,
period?
like just in work, it's like therapists, teachers, all of that kind of stuff. There's just an inner wired system of empathy and selflessness that I think you guys have, that I always am curious if it can ever be turned off.
Interesting. When I was a younger therapist, when I was a young, new practicing therapist, I remember working in the hospital, and I met the patient was like, I'm a therapist. And I was like, but you're in a wheelchair and you're quite aged. Like, you've had, like, this is the part, like, you're in your 80s. And she's like, yeah, I still see patients. And I was just like, wow. Like,
yeah. Inspired, or like just
at that point, I hadn't been in it like so long that now I feel like it's an honor when like patients walk in and invite you into their life, like truly invite you into their life, into the experiences. You know, I feel like that's the ultimate form of flattery, you know, is the ability to share. Because again, sometimes people tell you things that they haven't even heard themselves say, you know, out loud. Right. Exactly.
Right.
You know,
I had those moments. That's why like the transition of like practitioners was so difficult to me, because like I had moments where I had to sit there and be like, it's just us in the room. Like I need to kind of say this for me, or need to say this in general, and then you retract when you get switched to a different person. Like this person's running around the earth with this information.
right? Exactly.
You're like, bro, like, wait, she got my tea. Like, wait a minute, like, keep in contact, girl. Cause like, don't be
exactly.
You know? But like, I've always wondered that, like, in certain aspects, like, I always feel like teachers are always going to teach. You know, therapists are always going to teach. Where do you see you taking your practice? Like, going forward, what ambitions do you have to go?
So forward? I have colleagues who have opened up like full-fledged, like larger practices that only work with like LGBT, people of color. And at first, like that first kind of like business idea of mine was like, oh, I want to grow it to that level. But now, as I kind of like really recognize, like, you know, that there's so many things at play, I really want to keep it really small. I have a small group of therapists who work in my practice. And I think I want to keep it intimate like that. You know, I don't want this to be something ridiculously huge. And, you know, I think that so much of the mission gets lost, because then when you start taking so many people, now you have to start trying to figure out, like, so how do I get the clinicians to treat all these people who are interested, you know, in being part of my work? And the reality is recognizing that it's just kind of like there are some people who won't be able to get the help, you know, who won't be able to access certain things, unfortunately. Just say, you know what? So it hurts sometimes to say, you know what, I have a waiting list. I have a waiting list that's out 2 months. I really feel bad about that. I have sometimes people who call me with like in despair, and they're like, you know what, my husband is feeling like he wants to kill himself, and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I just have no time in my schedule. Like I would have no Saturday, no Sunday. Period.
And it's like you're. Are you forced to do that? Or are you able to really prioritize such a serious situation?
No, you can't. I mean, if I'm full like that,
you just can't. Like a person calls you, like you said, like my husband is literally sitting there, and this is a patient of yours for like.
Yes,
20
now in
years,
that
like, you have to.
I mean, I've hospitalized many patients. I've hospitalized a patient that threatened to kill me, because I wouldn't sleep with him. So,
Well, oh, right.
I did.
Right. I think you told me.
Right. It wasn't my patient. It was another
stories.
therapist patient who threatened to kill me because I wasn't interested.
Yeah.
Right. And so I had to hospitalize him. So again, even with other patients, if that patient is suicidal, homicidal, it's my responsibility as their practitioner to know where they are and be able to mobilize like an emergency response, whether that be like, because there's mobile crisis, there's things like, the police and the ambulance have to show up. If I call and say, hey, I have a patient who's at such and such and such, this is where I know them to be, or they have access to a gun and the risk of going to harm like, somebody else.
Wow. And you think they're gonna stay in that for like several more years?
I do.
What are some of
my passion projects are? I got a few passion projects right now. One of the things that and I'm still working it out actually. So I remember several years ago when I had my first patient call and say, I identify as Black, queer, non-binary. And I remember, again, I graduated back in the early 2000s. So I'm like, honey, what's all those things? Like, but now that
they were already using that
they weren't using that language back then. But like 3 years ago, when I first got this, like, I was like, what is that? Like, can you explain to me? So I feel like for me, being and progressing as an older, more experienced practitioner is to kind of really lend that same education to other practitioners. Because if I felt that way, then how are they feeling? How are they muddling through that? So my passion project is really crafting out something that's really useful. Doesn't feel like I'm lecturing, because that's, I think, sometimes what other practitioners, therapists hate, is to be like, oh, well, you're telling me what to do. No, this is offering you a way to be able to treat, to be able to be thoughtful, mindful, acknowledge, be considerate, of what others experience may be, to show up in your practice like that.
Yeah. What are 5 things that I think we all can do every day to kind of just put us just in a better space, or put us into the thing, just from your, everybody wants different 5, but
I think journaling is a huge part, and that doesn't have to be in the form of writing something. I mean, they have all of these great apps out now. One of the things that I like to recommend my patients is this thing called CBT Thought Diary. I mean, there's a prompt every day, a different prompt every day. I can go on there right now, and it'll be like, who do you like the most?
What's it called?
It's called CBT Thought Diary. Yeah. So Charlie Brown Thomas Thought Diary. And every day, it's free. I mean, there's, of course, paid parts of it. But every day, there's a different prompt that makes you kind of say, think. And it doesn't have to be anything big, huge, life-changing, thoughtful. It might be who do you call on when you need help? It makes a person's... Exactly. And a person honestly may say, I don't have anybody that I can call on when I need help. And then hopefully that'll get them to thinking, versus just kind of
you I need to put in that
Right.
position too. Yeah. Oh, cute. So that's one. Y'all better get these gems, bitch. That's one. Because I'm adding that. Oh my God. I'm like, I think I'm addicted to organization and self-help. Like 100%. I'm so always, I can't tell you how obsessive I am with always buying a new journal. I also can't tell you how obsessive I am of how many journals I have that have nothing.
It was cute. Hey, you know what? It was cute.
I will buy a new book just because I'm like, this year I'm gonna write. I'm gonna write it down. I'm gonna XYZ. I never do. And then I always have all of these books that just have random notes just spread out throughout the pages, where it's just my thoughts bled on the paper. But I like that, the CBT. And
I think another one is taking the time to
one?
read. I feel like we've gotten away from reading. And it doesn't have to be like, again, War and Peace or some craziness like that. But it can even be an audiobook. Just turn that TV off. Turn that TV off.
Okay. I was kind of cringing.
No. So I don't
read. Because I have ADD. I can't sit with a book, but absolutely love.
Right. Exactly.
The journey that it can take me by just listening. And mind you, one of my friends works at Audible, like one of my closest friends. And it's just like, I came across Toni Morrison's book, The Bluest Eye. And I'd always wanted to read her books. I would always sit in conversations when people talked about it, and I just was out of the conversation because I hadn't read it. And then when I came across the book, I realized why. I was like, oh my God, I'll never get through this. Like, I'll read the book and get through maybe a good day of being in that space, and 5 minutes later, that book is just on my shelf. I discovered it in Audible and was able to literally listen to it in Toni's voice.
Right.
A dream. I was like, oh my God, that journey. Yeah. So like, I'm glad you consider Audibles a good
Exactly. I'm listening.
No,
I'm listening to Viola Davis's book in Audible. I'm literally. Oh, her autobiography.
Book?
Yeah,
right. That's new, right?
I mean, again, reading. It doesn't have to be physically like looking, but listening to something that's outside of yourself, outside of this visual stimulation of TV, and allowing your brain to be transported somewhere else. Whether that be through physically reading or listening to it being read to you.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
So I think a big part is breath. I love breath work. I think that people don't pay it. Okay, so the idea, so we don't realize, because we're so people are so used to like their body taking in breath that they don't pay attention to how they breathe. Like a lot of times we hold our breath so much more than we realize. Like our brains are poorly oxygenated because we're not breathing. We're so caught up in like how many of us, how often are like, we're so busy, like, never pay attention to just, again, how am I breathing? How am I fully inflating my lungs? So I think breath work is a important thing. Just sit. People call it meditation. I call it breath work.
I have the most embarrassing confession when it comes to breath work. I literally have gotten cramps in the top of my torso, under my chest, because when I'm out, I'll hold my stomach and restrict.
All of us do it. So many of us do it. So,
like, you know what I mean? When you're standing up and the shirt, like, you try to suck your stomach in a little bit, and it's like I'm doing it right now and can physically talk to you, but literally the strain on the muscle will give me a cramp that kind of sometimes will hit me in a very, very painful way.
Right, exactly. And we're depriving our brains of that oxygen. And when you give your brain oxygen, your brain slows down. Your brain like takes a moment to kind of process things, just to, again, just that moment to get that oxygen, get good oxygen into your brain, slow those thoughts down, slow those processes down, slow those kind of like runaway, even emotions, even that we sometimes don't even realize are going on. So yeah, so that cramping that you feel like, yeah, but your brain is now being deprived of the oxygen. So breath work, I think, and some people call it meditation. I call it breath work. So I think that that's an important thing that people should do.
Anything. I just said I feel like I knew when I was going to talk to you. I was just like, bitch, are you ready to just look like a body of work? I'm like, damn, it's like, I can't even hold a stomach and I'm supposed to be out here doing breath work. And I'm getting crazy. Do you have practices? Like, do you have any, is there like, in the idea of like this engagement, how would, because like I loop these by the hour, so I think we got about like 5 minutes before I need to save it and kind of like just re-add it. Do you have online or some kind of practice that you do with people that you like that you would be able to offer like
Yeah, definitely I do.
Like a simple and like I would be the person and we could like do it.
For me to get it set up,
take?
it would take maybe about I would need to get it set up for about 10 minutes. Give me 10 minutes, and if you want to, we could, yeah.
You would need 10 minutes. Okay, so y'all, we're gonna take because IG only allows you to record for an hour. But I had to stop it before the Wi-Fi, so I don't know how long this is going. So I'm looping those two because the conversation is always like an hour and a half, hour, 45 minutes. I'm going to, let's take the 10-minute break. I want you to set it up, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to do the exercise.
So the way that it has to work then is, it has to be on my IG, so I would send you the thing to basically come on to my IG.
Okay, so then like you would invite me live. Okay, so cool.
All right,
so there we go. I'm gonna be patient. All right, 10 minutes.
Right.
We'll see you back. Keys to success.